Welcome, everybody, to another great episode of the Alan and Aaron Sports Talk Radio Show. I'm Alan Alford, and today we're going to have a fantastic show for you. But before we get started, we thank Chef G's Florida Barbecue Sauce. So delicious and addicting, you may need a support crew. So I want to thank our great sponsor, Chef G's Florida Barbecue Sauce. Please feel free to pick up a 4-pack at flbbqsauce.com. Again, that's flbbqsauce.com. We're in for a great time and a great show. Thank you for joining us. Let's get started.
All right, so we got another great episode of the Alan and Aaron Sports Talk Radio Show. We're joined by Jeff Glauser, and definitely he's a sports journalist. We're going to go ahead and hear from him and see what's going on. And in fact, let's start from there. How did you get started in sports journalism?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me on the show, Alan. I really appreciate it. Always love talking sports, so it looks like I picked the right place to be. As far as getting my start in sports journalism, it was pretty easy. So growing up, my original dream job was to be an athlete. By the time I hit my teenage years and realized I was too short, too small, too slow, got too winded too easily, I realized that probably wasn't in the cards to be a professional athlete. So around that same time, I discovered that I did have a knack for writing. I kept an ongoing journal. That always seemed to be the types of classes that I excelled in as far as English and things of that nature. So the next obvious step was to combine those two interests together. So that was what I went to school for, went to Jacksonville University and became the sports editor, ultimately became the editor of the school newspaper there, got an intern at the sports department there. My claim to fame while I was editor of the school newspaper is that I scooped the local media when we announced that we were getting our own football team at JU. We actually had an arrangement to put out a copy ahead of time where we would get past the local media, put out the special edition. I put the "Are you ready for some football?" as the headline. And I recall later that night in the 11 p.m. news, the local sports anchor started the TV cast with my headline, "Are you ready for some football?" and had my name on it. And, that was something that I took a great deal of pride with. So from there, it just seemed like the natural path. I felt like I was most of my element. My first year at JU was actually the first year of the Jacksonville Jags. So I feel like we kind of grew up together. And if you recall, they got good really fast. So I was at the game where they wound up getting into the playoffs in just their second year of existence. I think it was the same year that they hosted their first Monday Night Football game. And that was my first kind of a taste of being a journalist, where I had press passes for being a part of JU's media and was on the field. Here I was, this 19-year-old kid, that had his head turning either side, just wondering when somebody from security was going to put his, arm on my shoulder saying, "You don't belong here, kid." Never happened. So I remember it was a very dramatic ending where the Jags were playing the Steelers, and the Steelers had, drove the ball into the red zone, and I think they were down by 2, if I'm not mistaken, and they had a chance for a chip shot field goal with like 3 seconds left. They kick the field goal, gets blocked and returned for a touchdown with no time left. So here I am, this snot-nosed kid, right, feet away from the Jags bench. Everyone's bum rushing the center of the field. And I see Jimmy Smith walking toward me in my direction, star wide receiver at the time for the Jags. And I had my little tape recorder on one side, my notebook on the other. And I recall he had a really good game too, something like, 7 or 8 catches, over 100 yards. And nobody's around him yet. And I just see my path just going right to him. And I was like, well, here's my chance, as good a chance as any. So I mustered up the courage to say something, and whatever came out of my mouth. And it was something along the lines of, "Jimmy, how does it finally feel to get the respect you deserve on national TV?" Good enough. I mean, fair enough question, right? And I'll never forget the response. It was something along the lines of, "Yeah, oh yeah, baby, this is the NFL. Feels good." And that was like gold for me. I was like, oh, Jimmy Smith just said this into my tape recorder. I just remember, for the following day back at school, just me continuing this back when there was rewind buttons and tape cassettes. And I would just rewind it and play it back to all my friends, say, "This is Jimmy Smith. He said, yeah, it feels good, baby. It's the NFL. Yeah, baby, it feels good." And it just kept going over and over. So just the adrenaline rush that I got from that, knew that this was something that really fit for me. It was in my element. And although it was probably not in the cards for me to ever be a professional athlete, this was definitely, really the next best thing for me. So I hovered in that space for a little bit. In hindsight, I also realized that I had a bit of chase the shiny object syndrome. So there were some opportunities for me to take some detours along the way because it felt like, it was just a really wonderful opportunity to do so. I traveled for 2 years as a leadership consultant for my fraternity right out of school. So that seemed like just this opportunity to travel the country, meet different people, go to different sporting events too. So I have a lot of great sports memories from my 2 years. One of the coolest weekends I ever had was when I was traveling through Massachusetts and upstate New York. And this was back before they had GPSs or anything. So I was map questing it, if you recall MapQuest.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember.
Figuring out, okay, how can I connect all these dots geographically and have the coolest sports weekend ever? So I started out on Saturday in Springfield, Massachusetts. And then I moved my way to Sunday, the baseball, Cooperstown, New York. So I had the Basketball Hall of Fame one day, I had Baseball Hall of Fame the second day. And it was just being a nostalgic person as well, and just a student of the game. It was just the coolest thing that I could have had. So it was those experiences that made it worthwhile for me to take said detour. Went back to film school after that, just because when you visit over 100 schools, you begin to get wistful of the experience. And so I went back, and I knew I didn't want to go back as a journalist. It felt redundant to me. And I've always been, if there was one thing that I wanted to do outside of sports, it was just to be a part of the movie scene, being a part of the entertainment world. So I did that. And when half my class made the mass exodus out to Hollywood, I chickened out. And that's when I finally started that journalism career. So had a cup of coffee in South Florida for the Associated Press, was a stringer, and again, really felt in my element. And then, as quickly as it begun, it seemed to disappear. When print started giving way to digital, I found myself scrambling, worked with Bleacher Report for a while, which was nice. And it was a good vanity ad. It's become a huge site now for a lot of sports fanatics. And it was also an opportunity for me to finally kind of get my voice into it and incorporate my story into my columns and make it engaging enough where other people like me, who were nostalgic kids and always dreamed of being an athlete, could kind of relate through my lens and my experiences through it all. So it's been a fun trip, but throughout all the different types of hats that I've worn over the course of my career, that's always been the one that I felt was most authentically me. It was always where I felt like I was most in my element, and that I could tell the stories that I enjoyed hearing about myself.
Yeah, that's some story there. That's awesome. And did it ever, sometimes when you're covering a team like a football team, the Jacksonville Jaguars, did it ever sometimes get to the point where, there's a lot of players, I don't know if I'm prepared for every single one of them to ask them good questions?
Well, of course. Yeah. I mean, you always have to kind of pick your spots, because you're not going to have the opportunity to just work your way around the room. There's obviously, and now more than ever before, a whole slew of media that are just trying to position themselves to get that opportunity to ask their questions. So you need to really kind of understand how the scope of the game had played out when you get to that point after the game, to figure out what's your angle. All right. So it's more than just who won or who lost. What were the storylines that went with it? So maybe there was a particular miscue that really kind of changed the landscape of the game. Maybe you saw something behind the scenes, something on the sideline as far as an argument or a conversation that you want to tap into. So it's really kind of being observant. And that's the opportunity you get as a media member, in the fray, that you don't necessarily get if you're just an observer watching TV. And I felt like it was my obligation as a member of the media to be able to shine a spotlight on the story behind the story and figure out which players could add the most insight. And over time, you get a good understanding. Who are the guys that are going to be most forthcoming? Who are the ones that might have something a little bit more unique to share, and you lean into that. But usually, especially in my younger days, you might only get one shot in the press conference room and one shot in the locker room. So you got to make sure that it's a question that is not going to be shot down, of course, but also one that gives them an opportunity to intelligently answer it. Because nobody likes the gotcha journalism. There's a time and place for it, and usually it's when you establish yourself enough to be the one that asked that question. But at first, it's really a matter of building the relationship and making sure that there is that know, like, and trust factor in order for you to, be able to have your spot at the table, if you will.
Wow. So it definitely seemed like you need to know a lot. And you covered both, the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Philadelphia Eagles. How were those dynamics different with the fan bases?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit of a homer, so I'm biased. So I come from the Philadelphia area, but if there was ever a sport where I gave myself permission to have two favorite teams, it was in the NFL. Just because, again, I grew up with the Jags, so my first years as a member of the media were their first years as a franchise, and I that was really kind of my first taste of things. But as far as the fan base, I don't think anything tops a Philadelphia sports fan, and specifically when it comes to their Eagles. And namely within the last, I'd say 30 plus years, I would say it really kind of turned from a one-time baseball town and certainly a basketball town, especially when you incorporate the collegiate elements to it, to a football team, probably late 80s, early 90s, when you had Buddy Ryan and you had the gangrene defense. And it just reflected the personality of the entire region. Blue collar, rough around the edges, these loud, boisterous personalities, take no prisoners. That was everything that Philly was all about. I mean, we as fans, we were always kind of the forgotten element of the Northeast. You had obviously the pedigree of New York and their fan base and all the championships. And, even Boston, was, that they had a lot more of that tradition, I'd say, when it comes to winners, even though they had their own droughts for a time. But the Celtics, in and of itself is just, was such a huge thing. We didn't really have much. And in fact, from 1983 to 2008, we had this many championships from a professional level. So when we get this bum rap of being this salty fan base that, maybe is just not appreciative of what we have, I personally think it's unjustified because we've suffered more than any other fan base out there over the years. So, it's nice to see us turning the corner now. The Eagles have now become, a perennial contender. We've got another championship, that we can put into our trophy case. But when it comes to Jacksonville, the biggest challenge they had was that this was for years a college football town. You had the Gator Bowl, that was their thing. It was part Gator country, but you also had your share of Seminole fans too, and that's just what they gravitated to. That was their tradition. So certainly was helpful that the Jags became good really fast. It wasn't as helpful when they became just as bad just as quickly after that 10-year period with Tom Coughlin. They had about 15 years of mostly dry times. So over the last couple of years, you're starting to see the fan base is just they want something to pull for, because in general, when you have winning franchises, it seems to do something with the community too. It just brings people together. It gives people a reason to be happy, to give a stranger a high five in a bar, and bring us closer together. And I'm really excited about seeing that in this general vicinity now that I'm back in the Jacksonville area, now that there is a level of relevance again. They've got to the playoffs once again. I do find it mildly ironic that it's with the same coach that took the Eagles to the Super Bowl 5 years prior, and it's the same sort of elements that are working. These guys that are not necessarily household names, that are playing together as a team, that are doing it the right way, with grit and determination. So that's transferable. I think wherever you go, when fans see that the teammates get it, that they are willing to kind of involve themselves within the community, and that they're leaving nothing off the field, and they're giving it their all, naturally you're going to see a following because of that. So it's fun to kind of see that energy happening in both environments at the same time right now.
Yeah, so definitely if you have a team that's starting off, getting yourself on a great foot with wins, you sound like it's very, very important.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just you hit the ground running in the right direction. And especially when the Jags came. So it was the same year as 1995 as the Carolina Panthers. And what they both did was completely unprecedented at that time, and actually since, where both of them in their second year not only had a winning record, well, that was unprecedented, but made the playoffs also unprecedented, and both made their conference championships all in their second year. So it was like this new period of, you didn't have to pay your dues as much. You didn't have to go through that extended period of doldrums in order to make it to the promised land, or at least flirt with it. So it definitely helped to put them on the right path. And just the way that they were run, the fact that they had someone like a future Hall of Famer in Tom Coughlin, running a tight ship and doing it the right way, absolutely helped their cause. And I think that just goes without saying with anyone, where, wins translate into views. And, people like to follow a winner, and especially if it's one that they can relate to.
So definitely got to win. And you also had a chance to cover the Philadelphia 76ers. How is that different covering a basketball team? I know there's, of course, a lot less players, but how is it very different between covering a football team and a basketball team?
Yeah, so by the time I was covering the Sixers, it was more in an observer capacity. So unfortunately, I never had the opportunity, like I did in the NFL, to be in the locker room and to actually be able to intermingle with the players face to face. I've had, I would have some phone interviews and virtual interviews from that capacity. But, the difference there is that I had a lot more freedom and flexibility to write what I wanted to write. So since these were primarily columns and opinion pieces, then I didn't feel as restricted to just the facts, if you will, to quote the old Dragnet line. It was more, all right, what about these facts? What is it about this? What's the storyline or the angle that I can now dive into and give my own slant and say, okay, well, this is what I think. This is why I think it. This is what I feel should be done about that. And it was funny because right around that same time, I was doing something seemingly disconnected as an adjunct professor. I was teaching essay writing, but it was really the same format and the same structure, where you're first identifying an issue. Or what's the issue? Because if you don't have a take, then why should people listen, right? And then you're identifying essentially your thesis statement. Okay, so what is the central idea that you're trying to dive into? And then your argument. How are you backing that argument up? Because even if it's your opinion, if you're not able to back it up with facts and evidence, it's going to fall upon deaf ears. Why should people believe what you have to say if you can't supplement that with information that is, irrefutable, ideally? So it was a different way of going about it. And it was a double-edged sword because of that, because even though I had this newfound freedom and I can, get creative with my language and I can have some fun with it and really have my voice shine through, I also had this pulpit that I had to be responsible for. So I had to really consider whose feathers might I be ruffling by saying this? What potential controversies might come out of this? Could I be potentially burning some bridges because of what I'm saying about a player or a team? And is it worthwhile to do so? And really kind of weighing out the pros and cons between, is this something that needs to get out there? Is this something that people should hear that they might not have been aware of, that's worth the potential repercussions? Or is it something where I just have to choose my battles and figure out, am I doing it just to get a rise out of people? Or is it because there is a takeaway and a very important takeaway that the reader should be getting from this piece?
Yeah, and when you did that, did it sometimes ruffle feathers with the players because they didn't agree with your opinions?
It very well could have. I mean, fortunately, I never got that word back. I definitely got proof of concept in the comment sections with a lot of my comments. So, different fan bases would be up in arms, but that comes with the territory. You're not going to please everyone all the time, especially if you are coming in with a hot take and you have an opinion. So that you can't let that dissuade you as a writer. So regardless of any content that you're putting out there, the intent of putting it out there is to get it in front of people, and ideally as many people as possible. If that's the case, then the downside potentially to that is there are going to be people that are going to take exception to what you have to say. They might respond in a less than savory fashion. And, if you continue to take it to heart and take it personally, it's going to affect your writing moving forward. Because then you're going to be tentative as far as what to say, and you're going to be uncertain. Not to say that I don't consider a lot of feedback and opinions, but you have to also compartmentalize that between what's important to get out there and who you might be potentially rattling as a result.
So the ramifications, I mean, it may not have been great, but you had to deal with it. Sound like
It's part of the territory. Yeah. Anything where you're putting out a product or a service that's going to get in front of the masses, you have to understand that, like anything else, it's a numbers game. And there's going to be a certain segment of the audience that's always going to love you and follow you. And those are the people that you really want to gravitate to, of course, and figure out how you can continue to keep them engaged and involved. There's going to be a segment of people that are going to despise you and take exception to what you have to say. And that's just, that's just part of the breaks. And then there's going to be, the majority, they're going to be somewhere in the middle that you have to continuously figure out how to garner their attention and figure out how you can most resonate with them with what you have to say.
yeah, that definitely is interesting in a lot of ways. And one of the things that you have to kind of navigate through now is that you coach your kids' football team. Tell us some flag football. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I kind of got roped into it. So I always wanted to be kind of that cheering dad that didn't, have to worry about, who is being offended by my loud screams and all of that stuff. But I've always enjoyed coaching in regardless, regardless of the position that I was in a variety of different capacities. So I've served as, I would say, kind of a life and accountability coach for clients. I've served in leadership capacities. So being able to really espouse a lot of things that I've learned along the way, and be able to see that light bulb go off from the other person, there's no more rewarding experience, I'd say, for me. And it's just been so much fun, especially at that level. So they're from 6 to 8 years old. For many of them, including my son, this is their first experience doing organized football. Flag football. And, it's just so much fun seeing them absorb this information and then put it into practice on the field and really work on the values along the way and realize that it is more than just a sport, especially when you're first introducing them to it. It's a matter of what are the lessons that we can take from this, which I know the parents appreciate as well, where, okay, what can we talk about when it comes to teamwork, when it comes to sportsmanship, when it comes to respect? These are all things that not only are applicable when you're on the field, but when you're off the field and you're with friends and when you're at school and when you're with your parents. So having that part of it, to know that perhaps even in some small way, I'm making an impact with them that might last for a very long time, has definitely made it worthwhile.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. And for the parents who coach, where they don't go overboard with, being that parent where it's overbearing, what do you say to yourself to say, okay, they're just still kids at the end of the day?
Yeah, it's not about us. As much as we want to live vicariously through our kids, as much as I wanted to be that pro athlete myself growing up and then realized that wasn't in the cards for me, and maybe it will be for my son, who knows? But it's about them at the end of the day. And that's also something that has really transferred over to the work that I'm doing in my business too, is that one of the biggest revelations that I've gotten through me immersing myself into materials when it comes to helping other people change the conversation to what they were seen as, to what they want to be seen as, is at the end of the day, as much as you want to portray yourself in whatever light that you do, if you're catering a service or a product to a particular audience, they don't need to know right off the bat how great and wonderful you are. They don't need to know that you're a hero in some way, shape, or form, because they want to be the hero. They want to be that person where the spotlight is shown on. They want you to be the guide that helps to get them there. So that was kind of the big paradigm shift for me when it comes to whether it be coaching sports, coaching clients, or creating content, is that you want to first lead with them, whoever your audience is, as the hero, and then portray yourself as the guy that helps get them to where they are, to where they want to be.
Absolutely. And definitely that's what you're doing now. You're helping out a lot of, athletes transition to that next level. Please tell us more about what you do now to help out athletes.
Yeah, sure. So last year I launched my own site. So upon being at my own crossroads, I had mentioned a couple of the roles that I had. I'd gone to film school. I was a teacher. I certainly a journalist, as we know. I also pivoted into sales and worked in the reputation management space for a good amount of time as a sales director. So upon taking stock on these different hats, these seemingly disconnected paths that I had had, the one common through line that I immediately discovered was storytelling. So whether it be as a journalist or a teacher, trainer, salesperson, you name it, if you don't have a compelling story that resonates with your audience, it really doesn't matter what else you bring to the table. It doesn't matter what other bells and whistles you're offering. It's likely going to fall upon deaf ears because they need to know, like, and trust you. And the only way that they're going to be able to know, like, and trust you is if you are able to speak on their level, if you show them that you're relatable in some way, shape, or form, and then you provide them something of value that they can take with them. So knowing that I've had to change my story a couple of times over, that really appealed to me. And ultimately, as mentioned before, I was most in my elements when I worked as a sports journalist. So although I was never a pro athlete myself, I feel like I could speak the language. I understand their play. And I also understand that there is a common through line for them as well. So regardless of whether you were in the NFL, NBA, tennis, you name it, there's typically a very short lifespan to your career. By the time that you turn 30, most of those pro athletes are now retired. And for most of them, I imagine that it's probably not the point when they just want to take up golf and play bingo for the next 60 years of their lives and call it a day. Nor is it something that would probably be desirable. For many of them, they still have this purpose-driven passion that they want to figure out how they can leverage. But also, it can be a challenge to change the narrative of what they were seen as far as just an athlete or just any type of professional, to what they want to be seen as. Typically, it's a matter of figuring out what are the traits, the skills, even the interests and passions that you displayed in your time as that professional athlete that you can easily transfer over into this next role, so we can shine a spotlight on that and show how you're uniquely qualified to be seen now in that new light. So it's fun because it comes back to tapping into their story and figuring out what are the most important elements of it and how you can parlay that into something where you're now seen as someone who can be distinguishable from anyone else because of those unique experiences.
Wow, sounds great that you can go ahead and transition someone and get the right message across and keep doing what you're doing. And how
Thank you.
could people, oh, you're welcome. How could people follow you and contact you that are interested in transitioning from one level to the next?
Absolutely. So you're welcome to check out my website. Again, it's www.brandscribed.com. So like transcribed, but with a B. I do have a brand messaging playbook that I offer for free for anyone that goes on the site to download. That just gives you really kind of the initial steps on what to do when you're considering rebranding yourself. What are the baseline materials that you need to start helping yourself change that conversation and be seen as the industry expert in whatever venture that you want to set out to do? So you can check that out. You can book a call. I'm happy to have a complimentary consultation with you and see what I could do to help you tell your story and get it in front of the right audience. And I just love storytelling. I love hearing other people's story. We all have something unique about our own life experiences that, if we package it correctly, can make such an impact on so many other people. It's just a matter of figuring out how to get to where that is and where we want to be and connecting those dots. And I'd love to help along the way if I can.
Oh, that's wonderful. And just so people know, this is for all athletes?
So it is easily transferable to other professions. So what I've noticed is that there is a suite of deliverables that is transferable. We walk you through what's known as a Brandscribed, which is derived from story brand certification. So for anyone not familiar, that's based off of Donald Miller's best-selling book, Building a Story Brand. There's a certification that I went through. I'm now a guide, where it essentially follows the framework of the hero's journey. So for anyone that's familiar with The Hero's Journey by Joseph A. Campbell, it's basically how 99% of all screenplays are derived from. So you start with a character, they have an aspirational identity, so they want to achieve X, Y, Z. Of course, there needs to be a problem or some sort of conflict, because without a problem, there's really no plot. Then you insert the guide that shows how they're uniquely qualified to help get you to whatever that finish line is. They give you a simple plan to follow on that journey, and yada, 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 you live happily ever after. So the eye-opening moment for me is realizing that same framework that I used to teach my own students to do, whether it be for screenwriting, whether it be for essay writing, seamlessly transfers to building a brand and building a business. So it's that same simple, those same simple beats that you can follow to not only gain the clarity that you need to resonate with your audience, but the clarity that you need to make sure that you're seen in the right light where it's going to make the biggest difference possible. So professional athletes is kind of the sweet spot, and it's the area where I have the most comfort and can really kind of help them. But for anyone that's looking to really figure out how to write that next chapter, whether it be literally or figuratively in their life, that's where I'd be happy to help map out that game plan for you as well.
Fantastic. So we definitely appreciate you sharing that with us, Jeff. And that's Jeff Glauser. Appreciate you joining us here on the Alan and Aaron Sports Talk Radio Show, and continue success. It was an honor talking to you today.
Likewise, Alan. Thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, you're very welcome. My pleasure.